As the U.S. Senate toiled through a grueling round-the-clock Vote-a-Rama this week, the fate of President Donald Trump's ambitious One Big Beautiful Bill Act hung precariously in the balance. This sprawling legislative package, encompassing significant changes to tax and immigration policy alongside increased spending for border security, defense and energy production, has ignited a fierce debate within Washington, pushing the Republican-controlled Congress to its limits just days before the president's self-imposed July 4 deadline. The marathon session, stretching over 24 hours, saw senators debating and voting on numerous amendments, primarily highlighting deep internal divisions within the Republican Party. At the heart of the contention are proposed deep cuts to healthcare and food support programs intended to offset substantial tax breaks. The Congressional Budget Office, a nonpartisan federal agency, estimates that these cuts could strip nearly 12 million Americans of their health insurance coverage. Furthermore, critics including tech titan Elon Musk have pointed to the bill's projected addition of $3.3 trillion to the already staggering $36 trillion national debt, arguing it contradicts Republican promises of fiscal conservatism. Musk, who previously headed the Department of Government Efficiency (DOGE) under Trump, has been particularly vocal, threatening to back challengers to members of Congress who support the bill and even suggesting the formation of a new political party if it passes. President Trump in turn has fired back, referencing Musk's past receipt of government subsidies and quipping DOGE as the monster that might have to go back and eat Elon. Despite the intense infighting and open criticism, Senate Majority Leader John Thune expressed cautious optimism Tuesday morning, telling reporters, "I believe we do have the votes to pass the legislation." Republican Whip John Barrasso echoed this sentiment, advising senators to be in their seats for an imminent vote. The narrow Republican majority in the Senate means they can afford only 3 defections for the bill to pass, with Vice President J.D. Vance reportedly on Capitol Hill prepared to cast a tie-breaking vote if necessary. However, the political cost of this legislative push is already evident. North Carolina Senator Tom Tillis, a Republican, announced his decision not to seek re-election, a stunning move that came after he publicly stated his opposition to the megabill. Tillis's primary concern stemmed from the bill's deep cuts to Medicaid, which he warned would devastate his state, and its failure to provide meaningful tax relief for working Americans beyond gimmicky provisions like the no tax on tips plan. "My goal is not to undermine the president," Tillis explained, "but why not do it right? And why not take the time to make sure that we're not going to have unintended consequences, which will also have, I think, substantial political consequences next year if we're not careful." His retirement places him in the growing ranks of Republican senators, including Jeff Flake, Bob Corker, and Mitt Romney, who have stepped aside rather than endure a political career at odds with President Trump's agenda. Tillis bristled at such comparisons, yet his departure underscores the president's unchallenged grip on the party and his singular ability to influence Republican voters, leaving little room for dissent. President Trump, who left Washington earlier Tuesday to visit a new migrant detention center in Florida, affirmed he would return by early afternoon to continue fighting for the legislation. While initially setting a firm July 4 deadline, he later conceded to ABC News that meeting it would be very hard, suggesting somewhere around there as a more realistic timeframe. He delivered a veiled threat to Republican holdouts, stating, "I think it would be very wise for them to get on board. I really do. They'll pay the consequences." This blend of unwavering pressure and pragmatic flexibility highlights the administration's determination to see the bill through despite the significant political headwinds. The legislative journey for the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is far from over. If it manages to clear the Senate, it will return to the House of Representatives, where an earlier version passed by a razor-thin majority of 1 vote. Fiscal conservatives within the Republican-led House Freedom Caucus have already threatened to torpedo the Senate package, arguing it adds over $650 billion to the national deficit. This ongoing struggle reflects a deeper ideological clash within the GOP regarding the balance between tax cuts, spending priorities, and fiscal responsibility. The outcome of this legislative battle will not only shape critical aspects of American policy from healthcare access to immigration enforcement and the national debt but also serve as a crucial barometer for President Trump's influence on his party and the future direction of Republican politics. The coming days will reveal whether the president's big, beautiful bill can navigate these treacherous waters or if it will join the list of legislative ambitions stalled by internal party divisions and powerful dissent. The political and economic landscape of the United States is currently gripped by a dual storm as President Donald Trump's administration navigates an increasingly acrimonious public feud with tech mogul Elon Musk while simultaneously pushing a high-stakes tariff agenda that threatens to reshape global trade. The convergence of these two narratives paints a picture of intense policy battles and personal rivalries with significant implications for businesses, consumers, and international relations. The latest escalation in the public spat between President Trump and former close aide Elon Musk reached a fever pitch early Tuesday, July 1, 2025, after Musk reignited his vocal criticism of the president's One Big Beautiful Bill, a flagship spending package. Trump, responding via his Truth Social platform, launched a stinging attack on the tech billionaire, threatening to slash the billions in contracts Musk's companies receive and even suggesting the possibility of his deportation. Elon may get more subsidy than any human being in history by far, Mr. Trump asserted, adding that without subsidies Elon would probably have to close up shop and head back home to South Africa. The president further hinted that his Department of Government Efficiency DOGE, which Musk himself briefly headed, might investigate the SpaceX founder's business interests, proclaiming no more rocket launches, satellites, or electric car production, and our country would save a fortune. When directly asked by reporters about deporting Musk, Trump ominously stated, "We'll have to take a look." Musk, the world's richest person, quickly retaliated on X, advocating for a complete cessation of all subsidies. "I am literally saying cut it all now." His renewed opposition to the budget bill, which he labeled as supporting debt slavery, included a pledge to support primary challenges against Republican lawmakers who vote for the legislation. Every member of Congress who campaigned on reducing government spending and then immediately voted for the biggest debt increase in history should hang their head in shame. Musk wrote, even floating the idea of forming a new America party if the bill passes, decrying the current political climate as a Porky Pig party. This dramatic turn follows a brief period of reconciliation, as Musk had reportedly apologized to Trump just weeks prior for insults made during his contentious exit from the administration. The president, for his part, claims Musk's hostility stems from the termination of an electric vehicle tax credit program, a claim Musk vehemently denies, framing his opposition as a stand against national debt. Indeed, a Washington Post analysis indicates Musk's ventures have collectively received at least $38 billion in U.S. government contracts, loan subsidies, and tax credits over 2 decades, making the threat of their removal a potent weapon. The One Big Beautiful Bill itself is a monumental and contentious piece of legislation designed to extend Trump's first-term tax cuts at an estimated cost of $4.5 trillion and bolster border security. However, it faces significant division among Republicans, particularly those eyeing the 2026 midterm congressional elections, due to projections of a $3.3 trillion increase in national debt over the next decade and provisions that would strip healthcare from millions of the poorest Americans. Musk's public outcry accusing the bill's proponents of supporting debt slavery underscores the deep ideological chasm surrounding the package. Beyond the domestic political drama, the Trump administration is simultaneously pushing a complex and aggressive global trade agenda, with a self-imposed July 9 deadline looming for the reimposition of Liberation Day tariffs. A significant shift in strategy has emerged, with the administration now pursuing mini trade deals rather than comprehensive agreements, aiming for quick phased accords with countries willing to negotiate to avoid the harshest levies. Despite this, mixed signals from top officials, including Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and President Trump himself, have created uncertainty regarding the malleability of the deadline, adding pressure to ongoing talks. The implications of these tariff policies are already reverberating globally. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell recently indicated that tariffs are a primary reason the central bank is delaying interest rate cuts, noting that essentially all inflation forecasts for the United States went up materially as a consequence of the tariffs. Businesses are feeling the pinch, with General Mills forecasting lower annual profits due to macroeconomic uncertainty, including tariffs, and Nike planning to raise prices to offset a potential $1 billion tariff hit. Reports indicate rising prices for toys and other China-made goods on Amazon, while a Chinese toymaker has resorted to renting a factory in Vietnam to circumvent the steep levies. J.P. Morgan analysts have warned of a stagflationary slowdown in the U.S., with a 40% chance of recession in the second half of 2025, partly attributable to trade policies. Internationally, the July 9 deadline has spurred a flurry of activity. The European Union, while signaling a willingness to accept a 10% universal tariff on many exports, is fiercely negotiating for exemptions on key sectors like pharmaceuticals, alcohol, semiconductors, and commercial aircraft, and is now demanding immediate tariff drops as part of any framework deal. Canada, in a bid to revive stalled trade talks, rescinded its digital services tax targeting U.S. tech giants like Apple, Amazon, and Alphabet, with an agreement now targeted for July 21. Japan is pushing back against proposed 25% auto tariffs, while Trump has threatened new tariffs over its unwillingness to accept U.S. rice exports. India, meanwhile, appears on track to seal an interim trade deal as early as next week, potentially marking the first such agreement with a major U.S. trading partner. Even China, after months of negotiations, has confirmed a trade truce, with the U.S. agreeing to a framework to implement the Geneva Agreement, which includes a 90-day tariff reduction and a resolution to rare earth export delays. Other nations like South Korea, Mexico, and Pakistan are also engaged in intense discussions, bracing for the deadline. The current climate highlights the Trump administration's strategy of leveraging tariff threats to extract concessions, even as it creates significant economic uncertainty and strains international relationships. The shift towards smaller, quicker deals suggests a pragmatic adaptation to the complexities of global trade negotiations, while the unpredictable nature of deadlines keeps trading partners on edge. The ongoing feud with Elon Musk unfolding alongside these trade dynamics adds another layer of unpredictability to the domestic political scene, potentially shaping the 2026 midterm elections and even the formation of new political parties. As the July 9 tariff deadline rapidly approaches and the One Big Beautiful Bill progresses through Congress, the coming weeks will undoubtedly prove critical in defining the future trajectory of both American economic policy and its volatile political landscape. As the U.S. Senate continues its marathon Vote-a-Rama session, racing against a self-imposed July 4 deadline, the nation watches a sprawling legislative package that President Trump has championed as his big, beautiful bill. This monumental 940-page piece of legislation navigating the Senate's reconciliation process that bypasses filibuster threats stands poised to reshape American domestic policy, with profound implications spanning from healthcare and economic stability to the future of clean energy and even the landscape of the technology sector. At its core, the bill is widely understood to deliver substantial tax cuts, predominantly benefiting the wealthiest Americans. To offset this revenue loss, the proposed legislation makes deep inroads into critical social programs, most notably Medicaid, a move projected by analysts to leave nearly 12 million more Americans uninsured over the next decade. Yet beyond these headline-grabbing provisions, the bill delves into a myriad of less discussed areas, reflecting a comprehensive effort by Republican lawmakers to enact a broad spectrum of the administration's priorities. Among the significant changes are severe cuts to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program (SNAP), the federal food aid program relied upon by 40 million people. The bill proposes a roughly 20% reduction in SNAP funding, coupled with stricter work requirements and an increased financial burden on states. Supporters argue these measures are necessary to curb government dependence and save taxpayer money, while critics warn of increased hunger and poverty, particularly among the working class. The bill also signals a significant retreat from environmental initiatives, proposing a sweeping disinvestment in clean energy. It calls for the rollback of tax credits vital for solar and wind projects, as well as incentives for consumers purchasing heat pumps and electric vehicles, even going so far as to impose a new tax on clean energy ventures. This stance aligns with many Republicans who question climate change science and view such subsidies as artificial props for an industry that should stand on its own. However, tech luminaries like Elon Musk have vocally opposed these provisions, asserting that such tax credits are crucial not only for climate action but also for enabling U.S. clean energy firms to compete against heavily subsidized international rivals, particularly from China. In a notable escalation, President Trump has publicly threatened to direct his Department of Government Efficiency to scrutinize government support for Musk's companies, suggesting big money to be saved and implying that without subsidies Musk's ventures like SpaceX and Tesla might falter. Further illustrating the administration's agenda, the legislation allocates substantial new funding to bolster immigration enforcement, earmarking money for expanded border wall construction, increased surveillance along the southern border, and the development of new detention facilities. This comes as the administration intensifies its immigration crackdown, with President Trump himself visiting a controversial new immigrant detention center in the Florida Everglades, colloquially dubbed Alligator Alcatraz, which symbolizes a coordinated effort with state-level Republican leaders. Additionally, the bill curtails student loan relief programs, shifting the financial burden of higher education more directly onto borrowers, a move its proponents argue is fair to taxpayers who did not attend college, but which opponents fear will exacerbate the national student debt crisis and lead to more defaults. On the defense front, the bill significantly boosts military spending, funneling funds into shipbuilding, munitions, and President Trump's ambitious Golden Dome missile defense system. Beyond these core areas, the legislation also includes provisions for Trump accounts, tax-advantaged savings accounts for newborns starting with a $1,000 government contribution, and increased funding for air traffic control, the Secret Service, and America's 250th anniversary celebrations next year. The sheer scale of the bill's financial implications is staggering. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office (CBO) estimates it will add at least $3.3 trillion to the national debt over the next decade. To put this colossal sum into perspective, financial analysts note that it would take someone winning every lottery game in every U.S. state every single day for approximately 75 years to accumulate such an amount. Alternatively, it's enough to purchase all real estate in Manhattan twice over or exceed the combined wealth of the 22 richest individuals globally, including tech titans like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Mark Zuckerberg. If distributed evenly, it would provide every U.S. household with over $25,000. The legislative process itself has been a spectacle. The Senate's Vote-a-Rama has already set a new record for the most votes on amendments in such a session. While many Democratic efforts to alter the bill have been rebuffed, including attempts to restore Medicaid cuts and roll back tax cuts for the wealthy, some notable changes have occurred. An amendment proposed by Senator Susan Collins to boost rural hospital funding by taxing the wealthy was rejected. However, in a rare moment of bipartisan consensus, a provision that would have established a 10-year moratorium on state and local artificial intelligence regulations was struck from the bill with an overwhelming 99-1 vote, signaling a potential shift towards fragmented, localized AI governance rather than a unified federal approach. The political volatility surrounding this bill is mirrored in the public sentiment. A recent NPR/PBS News/Marist poll reveals that a significant majority of Americans, 3/4, believe democracy is under serious threat, a figure statistically unchanged from earlier this year. Similarly, nearly 3/4 view politically motivated violence as a major problem. While a vast majority of Democrats and independents perceive a threat to democracy, Republican concern has notably declined since the previous administration. Confidence in political leadership across the board remains low, with President Trump's overall job approval at 43% and even lower for his handling of the economy. Congressional Republicans fare slightly better among their own party than Democrats do, highlighting internal party divides. On immigration, the poll shows broad support for deporting those convicted of crimes, but a split on other groups. with a majority believing Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) has gone too far in its enforcement actions. The public also remains divided on the U.S. attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities, largely reflecting partisan lines. As the Senate pushes towards its final vote, the bill's fate beyond the upper chamber remains uncertain. While Republicans hold a stronger majority in the Senate, their margin in the House is considerably thinner, meaning even a few defections could complicate final passage. Yet President Trump's strong demand for its enactment means Republicans have little historical precedent for bucking his will since his return to office. The implications of this legislative package, from its direct economic and social consequences to its indirect effects on emerging industries like clean energy and AI, will undoubtedly be felt across the nation for years to come, shaping the discourse and direction of American policy well beyond the symbolic July 4th deadline. As the dog days of summer approach, the American economy finds itself at a critical juncture, navigating a complex web of ambitious legislative pushes, escalating trade tensions, and the ever-present shadow of fiscal uncertainty. Recent developments from Washington signal a bold yet controversial approach to economic steering, with the White House simultaneously championing a massive spending bill and engaging in high-stakes tariff negotiations that are reshaping global trade landscapes. At the heart of the domestic economic agenda is President Donald Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act (OBBB), a sweeping legislative package characterized by significant tax reforms and targeted incentives. Advanced in the U.S. Senate by a narrow 51-49 vote late Saturday, this bill is now poised to potentially inject a considerable stimulus into the economy. Despite warnings from credit agencies and critics who project it will add at least $3 trillion to the federal deficit over the next decade, many in the banking sector are offering their endorsement. The American Bankers Association, for instance, stated its strong support for numerous provisions, citing the much-needed tax relief they promise. David Seifnomores, chief economist for developed markets, echoed this sentiment, asserting that the OBBB would be almost unquestionably good for the U.S. economy over the next couple of years compared to passing nothing. This perspective largely stems from the bill's capacity to renew many expiring provisions of Trump's 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, thereby averting a sharp fiscal contraction anticipated in 2026 that could otherwise shrink household consumption and corporate investment. City strategists similarly anticipate the bill will serve as an economic tailwind, bolstering growth sentiment, particularly as they foresee the Federal Reserve loosening its monetary policy. They also downplay the risk of a bond vigilante moment, believing the bill's delta will be largely funded by tariff revenues. However, the enthusiasm is not universal. Critics, including Erica York, vice president of federal tax policy at the Tax Foundation's Center for Federal Tax Policy, have condemned the OBBB as fiscally irresponsible, arguing it significantly increases budget deficits and debt even when factoring in potential growth. York further highlighted concerns about the bill's complicated and poorly designed tax cuts, which she believes unfairly benefit certain workers while neglecting others. Moreover, the Internal Revenue Service is expected to face an increased administrative burden, needing to dedicate more time and resources to updating forms, guidance, and enforcement tools due to the bill's narrowly tailored tax rules. Morgan Stanley, while acknowledging the bill's pro-growth tax provisions could benefit businesses in key equity sectors like communications services, industrials, and energy, nonetheless flagged serious concerns about fiscal sustainability. Adding another layer of complexity to the economic outlook is the intensified focus on President Trump's trade policies, particularly as a self-imposed July 9th deadline looms for the potential reimposition of his toughest tariffs. The administration, reportedly shifting away from aiming for comprehensive large-scale trade agreements, is now pursuing smaller, mini-trade deals to avoid these harsh levies. This strategic pivot comes amidst mixed signals from top officials. While President Trump indicated he didn't foresee needing to extend the deadline, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent issued a stark warning to recalcitrant countries about the return of steep Liberation Day tariffs. Negotiations are in full swing across the globe, yielding varied outcomes. On the North American front, Canada notably scrapped its digital services tax on U.S. technology companies like Apple, Amazon, and Alphabet just hours before its scheduled implementation, a move that prompted the immediate resumption of stalled trade talks after Trump had threatened to cut them off entirely. In Asia, India appears on track to finalize an interim trade agreement marking a significant step towards a broader bilateral accord. Meanwhile, the European Union has signaled a willingness to accept a 10% universal tariff on many of its exports but is pushing hard for exemptions on critical sectors such as pharmaceuticals, alcohol, semiconductors, and commercial aircraft, as well as quotas for auto, steel, and aluminum. Japan finds itself under renewed pressure. With President Trump threatening new tariff rates over its unwillingness to accept U.S. rice exports, even as Japan adamantly resists the imposition of 25% auto tariffs. A notable breakthrough occurred with China as both nations confirmed a trade truce, agreeing to a framework that includes a 90-day reduction in tariffs and a resolution regarding rare earth exports. The UK has already cemented a trade deal reducing levies on cars and aircraft parts, though 10% tariffs on other exports remain and steel and aluminum issues are unresolved. The ripple effects of these tariffs are already being felt. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell confirmed that the central bank's cautious approach to interest rate cuts is directly attributable to the tariffs, stating, "In effect, we went on hold when we saw the size of the tariffs." Powell noted that inflation forecasts went up materially as a consequence of the tariffs, suggesting that while the U.S. economy remains largely healthy, the full impact is yet to filter through. Businesses are bracing for impact. Goldman Sachs analysts anticipate U.S. profit margins will be significantly tested, citing examples like General Mills forecasting lower profits due to macroeconomic uncertainty and Nike's expected $1 billion tariff hit. On the consumer side, prices for goods like toys and cars are already rising, with one Chinese toymaker even resorting to moving production to Vietnam to circumvent the levies. J.P. Morgan analysts have warned of a stagflationary slowdown in the U.S., assigning a 40% chance of a recession in the latter half of 2025 due to trade policies. Amidst this, the U.S. dollar has reportedly been falling by record levels in 2025, reflecting the broader economic uncertainty. As the July 9 deadline approaches and the One Big Beautiful Bill Act inches closer to becoming law, the U.S. economy finds itself in a precarious balancing act. The administration's dual strategy of aggressive fiscal stimulus and protectionist trade measures presents a complex forecast. While the OBBB aims to prevent a fiscal cliff and spur investment, the ongoing tariff disputes and their inflationary pressures could dampen its intended effects and challenge corporate profitability and consumer spending. The coming months will be crucial in determining whether these policies deliver the promised economic boost or exacerbate existing vulnerabilities, leaving investors, businesses, and consumers to navigate an increasingly volatile landscape shaped by political will and global economic realities. In a week marked by a flurry of high-stakes policy decisions and geopolitical maneuvers, the Trump administration finds itself at the epicenter of a multifaceted debate spanning domestic security, international alliances, and critical infrastructure. From the parched landscapes of California battling wildfires to the hallowed halls of the Senate debating a sweeping legislative package, and across the Atlantic grappling with defense spending, a complex tapestry of federal action and its far-reaching consequences is unfolding. Perhaps most immediately impactful on American soil is the contentious deployment of National Guard troops in Los Angeles, a situation Governor Gavin Newsom has vociferously labeled as President Trump's illegal militarization. This federalization, according to a recent report from the Governor of California's office on June 30, 2025, has severely hamstrung crucial firefighting resources in a state perpetually on edge during wildfire season. The California National Guard's critical firefighting crews, known as Task Force Rattlesnake, are operating at a mere 40% capacity, with 8 of their 14 teams diverted to Los Angeles. Governor Newsom expressed his relief, stating, "We're glad to see the top military commander overseeing Trump's illegal militarization of Los Angeles agree. It's time to pull back National Guard troops and get them back to their critical firefighting duties." President Trump, listen to your military leaders and stop the political theater. Indeed, new reporting indicates that top military officials are now echoing the governor's pleas, asking Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to return 200 of these troops to their vital firefighting operations. The impact extends beyond wildfires. The administration's unlawful deployment has also reportedly slashed California's National Guard fentanyl and drug interdiction force by 32%, undermining public safety and weakening border seizure operations. Compounding these challenges are what the governor's office describes as dangerous cuts to the U.S. Forest Service, which has seen a 10% reduction in all positions and a 25% cut in roles outside direct wildfire response, further threatening community safety. Despite these federal strains, California asserts its readiness, with CAL FIRE significantly expanding its workforce, adding an average of 1,800 full-time and 600 seasonal positions annually over the past 5 years, nearly doubling the previous administration's efforts, alongside investments in new air tankers and forest management projects. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, the Senate on July 1, 2025 commenced a highly anticipated debate on President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act, a legislative behemoth designed to advance his second-term priorities. Following a dramatic procedural vote, the bill, which the Congressional Budget Office (CBO) estimates would add a staggering $3.3 trillion to the national debt, has moved to the floor for up to 20 hours of debate. This legislative push underscores the administration's ambitious domestic agenda, though its financial implications raise significant concerns among fiscal watchdogs and political opponents. Internationally, President Trump has been touting a new defense commitment from NATO allies as a monumental win for the United States. Speaking at the NATO summit in The Hague on June 25, 2025, the president celebrated the allies' pledge to dramatically increase the defense spending to that 5% of GDP by 2035, an agreement he dubbed the Hague Defense Commitment. This move, he claimed, would add more than $1 trillion a year toward common defense, significantly alleviating the burden on the U.S. However, an opinion piece published by Roll Call on July 1, 2025 casts a skeptical eye on the feasibility of this ambitious target. Bruce Stokes, a non-resident fellow at the German Marshall Fund, points out that while increased defense spending is not unprecedented for European nations, achieving 5% of GDP faces severe economic and political hurdles. With current economic growth rates significantly lower than during the Cold War era, raising tax revenue for defense is largely not economically or politically plausible. Furthermore, cutting social spending, which constitutes a substantial portion of European budgets, e.g. 32% of GDP in France, 27% in Germany, faces strong public opposition. Polling by the European Council on Foreign Relations reveals that less than half the public in France, Spain, and Germany support increased national defense spending, with a majority in Italy actually opposing it. Facing these constraints, European NATO members are increasingly looking to debt financing, a short-term solution that also has its limits given already high government debt-to-GDP ratios in many nations. This skepticism is further complicated by President Trump's own ambiguous stance on Article 5, the collective defense clause of NATO, which he refused to definitively commit to earlier in the week, claiming numerous definitions of the agreement, adding another layer to the federal government's operational landscape. The Trump administration recently extended access to a critical Defense Department weather forecasting dataset, the Defense Meteorological Satellite Program (DMSP). This decision, reported by Politico Pro on June 30, 2025, came after fierce criticism from scientists who warned that ending access to this data would diminish hurricane forecasting accuracy just as the 2025 storm season was ramping up. While NOAA initially disputed the severity of the impact, the extension now until July 31 underscores the vital role of federal data in public safety and disaster preparedness. Collectively, these developments paint a vivid picture of a federal administration navigating a complex array of domestic demands, fiscal realities, and international pressures. The interplay between federal policy decisions, whether on troop deployment, legislative spending, or data access, and their tangible impacts on state-level emergencies, economic stability, and international relations, highlights the intricate web of modern governance. As the Senate continues its debate on the One Big Beautiful Bill, and European allies grapple with the financial implications of their NATO commitments, the long-term consequences of these choices will undoubtedly shape the landscape of American and global security, public safety, and economic prosperity for years to come. In a dramatic turn of events that has sent ripples across the geopolitical landscape, the fragile holding pattern in the Middle East following recent U.S. airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities and a subsequent ceasefire is now under intense scrutiny as both American and Iranian officials navigate a complex path between military deterrence and the potential for renewed diplomatic engagement. The delicate balance achieved by President Trump's administration, often characterized by a peace through strength approach, is being tested, with public opinion polls offering a fresh look at American sentiment. The recent escalation saw the United States launch airstrikes on key Iranian nuclear sites, including Fordow, Isfahan, and Natanz, which President Trump controversially claimed were completely and totally obliterated. However, General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, offered a more nuanced assessment, stating that initial battle damage reports indicated extremely severe damage and destruction. This was further elaborated by Rafael Mariano Grossi, head of the UN's nuclear watchdog agency, who told CBS News that while the strikes caused severe damage, it was not total damage, suggesting Iran could resume uranium enrichment within months. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi echoed this resilience, asserting that one cannot obliterate the technology and science for enrichment through bombings, and that Iran could expeditiously repair the damages and make up for the lost time. These military actions came after a 12-day period of missile exchanges between Iran and Israel, a conflict that culminated in a ceasefire, with Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei declaring victory, a claim swiftly refuted by President Trump. Amidst this volatile backdrop, the possibility of diplomatic talks has emerged, albeit with significant caveats. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi, while stating to CBS News that the doors of diplomacy will never slam shut, expressed considerable doubt about a swift resumption of negotiations. He emphasized that for Iran to re-engage, we will have to first ensure that America will not revert back to targeting us in a military attack during the negotiations, adding that we still need more time. This cautious stance is interpreted by experts as a strategic maneuver. Behnam Ben Tailblue, senior director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracy's Iran program, noted to Fox News Digital that Tehran's strongest weapon when it is weak is actually diplomacy, suggesting that Iran uses negotiations to buy time and bail out the regime. This perspective highlights the inherent tension in any future dialogue where Iran seeks to prevent wider military action from emboldening domestic dissent. On the American side, President Trump's rhetoric surrounding potential talks has been somewhat fluid. Following a NATO summit, he initially suggested that the U.S. would meet with Iranian officials next week, and that an agreement, though not that necessary, would focus on preventing a nuclear program as we destroyed the nuclear. However, a subsequent post on Truth Social clarified that he was not talking to Iran, a statement further explained by White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, who confirmed that while the president himself has not engaged directly, communication with Iran continues through the administration's special envoy. This communication strategy appears to be supported by a recent national survey conducted by American Pulse Research and Polling. The poll, conducted after the airstrikes and ceasefire, revealed solid public approval for Trump's handling of the crisis, with 56% approving his efforts to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons and 54% specifically approving of the airstrikes. Notably, 51% of respondents viewed Trump more favorably due to his combined military-diplomatic approach, a clear indication that Americans recognized and rewarded his dual-track strategy of applying pressure while keeping negotiation channels open. The survey further underscored the American public's deep understanding of the stakes involved, with 71% of voters across the political spectrum believing that a nuclear-armed Iran would use its weapons. This bipartisan consensus on the red line for Iran's nuclear ambitions provides a strong mandate for deterrence. The poll also found that 48% believe the strikes and ceasefire will deter adversaries, reinforcing the public's support for a peace through strength policy. Beyond Iran, the message of American military capability underscored by the successful long-range missions of U.S. stealth bombers was clearly intended for global audiences including Beijing, Moscow, and Pyongyang. Domestically, the poll also highlighted significant anxiety regarding border security and the potential for terrorism, with 61% agreeing that cartels and sleeper cells likely exploited open border policies, indicating lingering concerns about national safety. As the dust settles from the recent military actions, the path forward remains uncertain. The Iranian foreign minister's conditional openness to diplomacy, coupled with President Trump's strategic ambiguity and the American public's clear support for a tough but nuanced approach, sets the stage for a protracted period of negotiation and vigilance. The upcoming meeting between President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will undoubtedly shape the immediate diplomatic agenda, but the underlying challenge of Iran's nuclear ambitions and the broader regional stability will continue to demand a delicate balance of deterrence and dialogue. The question is not if diplomacy will be pursued, but rather under what terms, and whether the fragile holding pattern can evolve into a more stable resolution.